Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. The 117th Congress was sworn in yesterday, and as usual, the House of Representatives chooses their Speaker. It was a close one, but Nancy Pelosi was reelected as House Speaker. Just how close was it? Well, there's this article from my good friends over at the Epoch Times. How Pelosi reelected as House Speaker in a tight vote. The U.S. House of Representatives voted 216 to 209 to re-elect Representative Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, as a Speaker on January 3rd to lead the chamber's narrowest majority in 2 decades. 5 Democrats defected. Representative Lisa Slotkin of Michigan, Representative Radical Spannerberger of Virginia, and Representative Mickey Sherrill of New Jersey voted present. Two Democrats voted for candidates other than Pelosi. Connor Lamb of Pennsylvania voted for Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, while Representative Jared Golden of Maine voted for Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. In a time marked by historically low trust in government, new voices are necessary to moving forward and achieving real progress, Spannerberger said in a statement. Last Congress, I kept my promise to vote for new leadership upon my swearing in, and in this Congress, I remain consistent in my commitment to ushering in new leadership. Accordingly, I did not vote for Speaker Pelosi. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri initially didn't respond when called to vote. Bush, a Black Lives Matter activist who was sworn into Congress earlier the same morning, is a member of the expanding progressive quote-unquote squad. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, the de facto leader of the squad, was also absent from the floor when it came her turn to vote. Both later voted for Pelosi. After telling their constituents that they would support Pelosi for Speaker last Congress, 5 House Democrats just went back on their promise and handed Pelosi the gavel for 2 more years of her failed and radical leadership. The House Republicans said in a statement apparently aimed at the progressive squad. Republican Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, who served as the House Minority Leader during the last session, ran against Pelosi. He will again lead the House Republicans as a minority leader. All of the Republicans voted for McCarthy. Pelosi has led the House Democrats since 2003 and was widely expected to retain her post despite a quiet effort to oust her. Democrats held a 222-211 edge over Republicans ahead of the vote, and the anti-Pelosi effort counted on absences which could give the GOP the edge. No Democrats stepped forward to challenge Pelosi ahead of the vote. The Democrats saw a dozen incumbents lose during the 2020 general election and did not defeat a single Republican representative. One House race in New York is still being decided, and there's a vacancy in Louisiana after GOP Representative-elect Luke Ludlow, 41, died after a heart attack following an operation related to contracting COVID-19. Pelosi, who's 80 years old, recently suggested anew that these would be her last 2 years as Speaker, referencing a statement she made 2 years ago in which she said she would step aside after this period. The Speaker's election came 3 days before the joint session on January 6, during which Congress would vet the Electoral College votes for the presidential election. Dozens of House Republicans have committed to lodging objections to the Democrat electors from states in which President Donald Trump has disputed the outcome. During the last session, Congress enacted and Trump signed a $900 billion CCP virus pandemic relief package. Trump pushed to increase individual payments as part of that package to $2,000, while calling for the removal of spending he deemed wasteful, including $10 million for gender programs in Pakistan. Democrats took up Trump's call to boost the individual payments, but Republicans blocked the effort. Republican congressional strategist Brian Dowling Former senior counsel to Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky told the Epoch Times that Pelosi's win represents a temporary truce between the House Democrat caucus, or in the House Democrat caucus between Democrat socialists such as Ocasio-Cortez and more moderate liberals. Democrats have some temporary unity going into the new Congress, Darling said. But not many think the peace between the left flank of the party led by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will hold more than a few months. Policy will divide the caucus, and it will not be long before the AOC squad is upset that they didn't get the Socialist Green New Deal and legislation to federally defund the police implemented, said Dowling, who heads Liberty Government Affairs in the nation's capital. Taxpayer Protection and Alliance President David Williams predicted that Democrat unity will continue in the Democrat Socialist favor, noting that this is a clear signal that the progressives want their agendas such as the Green New Deal and Medicare for All front and center during the 117th Congress, which would be disastrous for taxpayers in the country. The TPA chief added that despite all the bickering and complaining about Pelosi's leadership, the Democrats fell in line and ignored the election, which saw a strong gain by Republicans in the House of Representatives. Heritage Action for America Executive Director Jessica Anderson told the Epoch Times that Pelosi resumes the speakership with the thinnest Democrat majority in decades because her embrace of radical policies hurt the left in November as they lost numerous key moderate districts and failed to oust a single sitting Republican. Impeachment, the border wall, and the anti-police crusade were very unpopular, especially in the swing districts. That's why moderate Democrats, Jared Golden and Connor Lamb, voted against her. And, okay, I agree with the moderate Democrats. Basically, I want to say ever since Obama became president back in 2008 that Congress has shifted further and further to the left, and you hardly see any dog Democrats anymore. You know, the Joe Liebermans and maybe the Al Gores. I don't know about Al Gore, but definitely we don't see any Joe Lieberman type or even Zell Miller type Democrats anymore. We see the hardliners like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. But anyway, as I had mentioned earlier, it was a very close vote for the speakership. How close was it? Well, put it this way. This from BizPack Review. If you thought Election Day was nuts, today's speaker vote math could bring down Nancy Pelosi. This was from BizPack Review yesterday. If the Chinese play can deliver Joe Biden in the White House, then anything is possible. Even seeing the gavel rip from the hands of 80-year-old Representative Nancy Pelosi of California. With the new Congress convening this week, the first task is to elect a speaker, and Fox News congressional reporter Chad Pergram shared an exhaustive outline thread on how that's not entirely out of the question. As Pergram noted up front, the remote voting established in the last Congress is not in effect until the new body implements it, which occurs after the vote for speaker, which means members must be present to vote. And with Pelosi enjoying the tightest majority in recent history, she can afford few losses. There were 15 petty defections in the 2018 vote for speaker, which is greater than her current margin. Chad Pergram tweeted yesterday, stating the new Congress is inherently messy in a pandemic. The House of Representatives implemented quote-unquote remote voting in the spring. Pergram explained that because the old rules don't carry over, everyone has to show up at noon on Sunday. He also asked, is it appropriate for House members who have tested positive, have been in quarantine or been exposed to be present today? And he tweeted that out, and then he tweeted later, first, the House must take care of old business. The House meets for the last time at 10 a.m. Eastern and adjourns the 116th Congress. The new 117th Congress starts at noon Eastern per the Constitution. And explaining the first order of business, which is a critical quorum, Pergram goes into painstaking detail of how this will play out due to the pandemic. The first order of business is a quorum call to get everyone there pandemic style. Under normal circumstances, all 435 House members elect will crowd into the chamber to vote electronically and record their presence. However, they'll be in groups, as Pilgrim had pointed out, and most of the or all of the tweets are packed in the article if you want to take a look at them. But Pilgrim said members are instructed to report to the chamber, record their presence, and depart. We expect it will take until a little after 2 p.m. Eastern to get the quorum there. Watch to see exactly how many members show up for the quorum, Pilgrim tweeted. This will be crucial because it will dictate the size of the House to begin and how many votes House Speaker Nancy Pelosi needs to return to the Speaker suite. Pilgrim explained that Democrats will nominate Pelosi and the GOP will nominate House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California. The House will then begin a manual roll call with members filing into the chamber, again in groups, and verbally announcing their vote, he further explained. And while Pelosi is expected to win this vote, Pilgrim notes the slim majority Pelosi has and gets into the math that could deliver different results based on a number of developing events. The House will observe a moment of silence to note the death of the late Representative-elect Luke Ludlow, Republican of Louisiana. The House should start at 432 members and 3 vacancies, 222 Democrats and 210 Republicans. By the way, Ludlow died from complications related to coronavirus. Representative-elect Maria Elvira Salazar, a Republican of Florida, indicates she will not be present to take the oath of office. So that's how we get to at least 3 vacancies to begin the new Congress, possibly more. Pelosi indicated she will seat Representative-elect Mariannette Miller Meeks of Iowa after her 6-vote victory over Republican Rita Hart, but Hart has asked the House administration to probe the outcome in that contest. This is where it could get interesting, Pilgrim tweeted out, and this is where the math could get interesting, resulting in a possible Republican majority. Stressing that anything can happen during a pandemic, Pilgrim makes a critical point that whichever candidate secures an outright majority of the entire House is the new Speaker, not the most votes. We always say it's about the math. Pilgrim tweeted, it's about the math, it's about the math. While the math really matters today, whichever side has the most members present today is in the majority. Period. Pelosi also tweeted, and anything can happen during a pandemic. Even Pelosi has said that her foe in the Speaker's race is COVID. The successful Speaker candidate secures an outright majority of the entire House, not the most votes. Pilgrim then breaks down how that could result in McCarthy wielding the Speaker's gavel for the next 2 years. Representative Jim Cooper, Democrat of Tennessee, voted president in 2019, but Cooper now says that he will vote for Pelosi. Representative Elisa Slotkin, Democrat of Michigan, voted president in 2019. Slotkin says she can't support Pelosi. The process could get messy and drag out, and while rare, Pilgrim noted that it has happened before, tweeting out, what if no candidate secures 217 votes? Well, the House keeps voting until it picks a Speaker. A vote for a Speaker hasn't gone to a second ballot since 1923. House Speaker Frederick Gillette, Republican of Massachusetts, finally prevailed on the 4th ballot. The House burned 2 months and 133 ballots in 1856 before finally deciding Nathaniel Banks of Massachusetts was fit to be Speaker. We just knew it'll take a long time to wrap all of this up. But we are advised that Sunday could be a very long day. And as I had mentioned before, Pelosi did win the speakership barely, but she is Speaker, so who knows what will happen the next 2 years. And there was even more drama, this coming from our good friends over at the Washington Examiner. McCarthy rebukes Democrats before handing gavel to Pelosi. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy criticized the Democrat agenda and efforts to curtail the GOP in the coming Congress before handing over the gavel to newly elected Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Democrats elected Pelosi to serve a fourth non-consecutive term as Speaker, but before she addressed the House, McCarthy used the minority leader's traditional remarks ahead of the Speaker to chide Democrats over planned changes to the House rules that will limit the Republican minority and punish some social media activity. Under these rules, all members are equal, but some are more equal than others, McCarthy said. As for our constituents, it means freedom of speech is silenced, good ideas are stifled, and dissent punished. Why would an American political party use this as their first action in the new Congress? McCarthy, a Republican, and Pelosi, a Democrat, are both Californians. McCarthy is eyeing the Speaker's gavel after the 2022 election, when Republicans hope to win back the majority. He said voters in November sent a message that they are dissatisfied with Democrats and their progressive agenda. 2 months ago, the American people set it up, McCarthy said. Americans are fed up with it, and we Republicans are too. As a party of Lincoln, Republicans understand what it means to carry our constituents' concerns with us at all times. We are a growing working class coalition of proud Americans, more energetic, united, and confident than ever before. We believe in the exceptionalism of this nation and aren't afraid to say it. House Democrats plan to adopt a rules package for the 117th Congress on Monday that will change the way the minority can try to amend legislation. The rules change would essentially make it impossible for the GOP to win any last-minute amendments. Democrats will also adopt a rules change that will make it an ethics violation for any members to circulate certain social media messages that are considered deep fakes. Pelosi, in her acceptance speech, didn't take any jabs at the GOP. Instead, she touted rules changes aimed at diversifying Congress and advocating for the disadvantaged. The new rules for Congress establish a bipartisan select committee on economic disparity and fairness and growth. The coronavirus pandemic, she said, has pulled back the curtain on even worsening disparities in our economy and our society, and said Congress must pursue justice, economic justice, justice in health, racial justice, environmental and climate justice. She said the most urgent priority of Congress will be defeating the coronavirus, and said the latest coronavirus aid package worth $900 billion is not enough. Democrats want a new round of aid that provides money to state and local governments who pay for essential workers. We owe them more, Pelosi said. Now, one thing that I find interesting with all this is, as is said right here, House Democrats plan to adopt a rules package for the 117th Congress on Monday that will change the way the minority can try to amend legislation. Well, if the Republicans do maintain or do get the majority in 2023, then they might do the same thing and put the Democrats behind the eight ball. You know, kind of like how in the Senate, where you had the Democrats lowering the judicial confirmation from a supermajority of 67 or 2/3 of the Senate to just a simple majority of 51. You know, I mean, just like that blew up in the Democrats' face when the Republicans regained control of the Senate. This might blow up in the Democrats' face in 2023 if and or when the Republicans regain control of the House. And oh, by the way, this was not the only drama in the House of Representatives, as we see from the Washington Times. House Democrats open 117th Congress with a prayer that ends with "Amen" and "A woman." The 117th Congress kicked off with the fresh controversy Sunday when the Democrat delivering the opening prayer continued by saying "Amen" and then added "A woman." Representative Emanuel Cleaver, Missouri Democrat, ended his prayer in the name of the monotheistic God, then added what sounded like Brahma before ending with "and God known by many names, by many different faiths, Amen and Awomen." Critics, led by Republican lawmakers, were quick to point out that Amen means "so be it," and does not refer to the male gender, while a woman doesn't mean anything. Amen is Latin for "so be it," tweeted Representative Guy Reschenthaler, Pennsylvania Republican. It's not a gendered word. Unfortunately, facts are irrelevant to progressives. Unbelievable. According to Catholic.com, amen is a word that came to English from Latin, which got it from Greek, which got it from Aramaic, which got it from Hebrew. Technically, Aramaic may have had it anyways before it became the standard language of the Jewish people a few centuries before the time of Christ. I guess the virtue signaling Democrats didn't check the Hebrew etymology of the word amen to realize that it has nothing to do with genders, tweeted Representative Lowen Boebert, Colorado Republican. But don't let facts get in the way of a good virtue signal. Also, didn't those words just get banned? The prayer to and you can see the tweets here, or rather the tweet from Guy Reschenthaler yesterday. Indeed, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Rules Committee Chairman James P. McGovern released Friday a proposed rules package that would honor all gender identities by changing pronouns and familial relationships in the House rules to be gender neutral. The proposal would put the kibosh on the use of he and she, as well as mother and father. That package must be approved by a vote of Congress. Mr. Cleaver posted a video of the prayer on his Twitter feed, but offered no explanation as to why he used "a woman." I was honored to deliver the opening prayer for the 117th Congress. May God bless each and every representative with the courage and wisdom to defend our democracy and the liberties we all hold so dearly, said Mr. Cleaver, who is listed as a United Methodist pastor on congressweb.com. Tweeted Representative Matt Gaetz, Florida Republican, "Amen and a woman, don't they know that gender isn't binary? And what about the other 42 genders?" And just so you, and here's a listing, here's a little listen of that video or of that prayer.
We ask it in the name of the monotheistic God, Brahma, and God known by many names, by many different faiths. Amen and a woman.
Unflipping believable that would happen. I mean, and it's especially on the House floor. But then again, you know, that's what we're getting now. And, you know, I mean, God only help us when we go to face him in judgment. Leave a comment below as to what you think about this. Also leave a comment as to your thoughts on Pelosi being House Speaker and as well as the narrow Democrat majority. And I'll see you in the next one. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, both the House and Senate meet in a joint session of Congress to certify the Electoral College results. How does that happen? What happens? And what happens if people object? We got this from the AssociatedPress.com. That is an explainer. Wednesday's congressional joint session to count electoral votes has taken on added importance this year as congressional Republicans sided with President Donald Trump are pledging to try and undo Democrat Joe Biden's victory and subvert the will of the American people. The Republicans, a dozen senators, and many more House members are citing Trump's repeated baseless charges of widespread fraud. They say they will officially object to the results, forcing votes in the Republican-run Senate and the Democrat-controlled House that will almost certainly fail. There was not widespread fraud in the election, as has been confirmed by a range of election officials and by William Barr, who stepped down as Attorney General last month. Neither Trump nor any of the lawmakers promising to object to the count have presented credible evidence that would change the outcome. Nearly all of the legal challenges put forth by Trump and his allies have been dismissed by judges. The Supreme Court, which includes 3 Trump-nominated judges, has also denied requests to hear a pair of cases aimed at invalidating the outcome of the election in key battleground states. The congressional meeting on January 6 is the final step in reaffirming Biden's win after the Electoral College officially elected him in December. The meeting is required by the Constitution and includes several distinct steps. Here's a look at the joint session. What happens when Congress meets Wednesday? Under federal law, Congress must meet January 6 to open sealed certificates from each state that contain a record of their electoral votes. The votes are brought into the chamber in special mahogany boxes used for the occasion. Bipartisan representatives of both chambers read the results out loud and do an official count. The President of the Senate, Vice President Mike Pence, presides over the session and declares a winner. The session begins at 1 p.m. Eastern. What does the Constitution require? The Constitution requires Congress to meet and count the electoral votes. If there is a tie, then the House decides the presidency, with each congressional delegation having 1 vote. Now that hasn't happened since the 1800s, and Biden's electoral win over Trump was decisive, 306 to 232. How does the session unfold? The 2 chambers meet together midday to count the votes. If the Vice President cannot preside, there is President for the Senate pro tempore, or the longest-serving senator in the majority party to lead the session, and that's currently Republican Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa. The presiding officer opens and presents the certificates of the electoral votes in alphabetical order of the states. The appointed tellers from the House and Senate, members of both parties, then read each certificate out loud and record and count the votes. At the end, the presiding officer announces who has won the majority votes for each president, or for both president and vice president. Now, what if there's an objection? If a teller reads, after a teller reads the certificate from a state, any member can stand up and object to that state's vote on any grounds. But the presiding officer will not hear the objection unless it is in writing and signed by both a member of the House and a member of the Senate. If there is such a request, then the joint session suspends and the House and Senate go into separate sessions to consider it. For the objection to be sustained, both members must agree to it by a simple majority vote. If they do not both agree, the original electoral votes are counted with no changes. The last time such an objection was considered was 2005, when Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones of Ohio and Senator Barbara Box, when Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones of Ohio and Senator Barbara Box of California, both Democrats, objected to Ohio's electoral votes, claiming there were voting irregularities. Both the House and Senate debated the objection and easily rejected it. It was only the second such time such a vote had occurred. Now, who is expected to object? Dozens of House Republicans and a smaller group of GOP senators are expected to object to the count from some swing states where Trump has alleged fraud, despite the consensus of nonpartisan election officials and even Trump's former Attorney General that there was none. None of the members have presented detailed evidence, and none of them objected to the swearing in of congressional lawmakers who won the election on the same ballots. In the Senate, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was the first to say he would join with the House Republicans. On Saturday, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas announced a coalition of 11 additional senators who vowed to vote against unspecified state electors on Wednesday unless Congress appoints an electoral commission to immediately conduct an audit of the election results. Hawley and Cruz are both among potential 2024 presidential contenders. The challenges have split the party. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has urged his colleagues not to object, saying last month on a public call that the vote would be terrible. Several other state Republicans have criticized the effort as well, including Texas Senator John Cornyn and South Dakota Senator John Thune, the number 2 Senate Republican. Thune said last month that any objections would go down like a shot dog in the Senate. On Sunday, Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse said the challenge is bad for the country and bad for the party. Now, what is Pence's role? Pence's role is largely ceremonial, and he has no power to affect the outcome, despite Trump's wishes to the contrary. The role of the vice president as presiding officer is often an awkward one. as it will be for Pence, who will be charged with announcing Biden's victory and his own defeat once the electoral votes are counted. Pence won't be the first vice president put in an uncomfortable situation. In 2001, Vice President Al Gore presided over the counting of the 2000 presidential election. He narrowly lost to Republican George W. Bush. Gore had to gavel several Democrats' objections out of order. In 2017, Biden presided over the count that declared Trump the winner. Biden also shot down objections from House Democrats that did not have any Senate support. Now, once Congress counts the votes, what's next? The joint session is the last official chance for objections, beyond court cases that have so far proven ineffective for Trump and his team. I think there comes a time when you have to realize that, despite your best efforts, you've been unsuccessful, Cornyn said earlier this month. Now, granted, it will be the last official chance, but anything can happen between now and January 20th at noon, as has been seen many times in the past. And by the way, Congress had approved the rules regulating the January 6th vote count. This coming from my good friends over at the Epoch Times. And hold on a minute. There we go. Congress approves rules regulating January 6th electoral vote count. The House of Representatives and the Senate on January 3rd adopted rules that outline how the counting of Electoral College votes will take place on January 6th. The rules were passed without recorded votes. Instead, a voice vote was used in both chambers. The guidance, introduced by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Texas, says the chambers will meet in a joint session on January 6th, presided over by Vice President Mike Pence, who, as president of the Senate, will open all the certificates and papers purporting to be the certificates of the electoral votes. The rules state a nod to the fact that 7 states sent so-called competing electors to Washington, certificates for both Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. The certificates and papers will be opened, presented, and acted upon in alphabetical order, starting with Alabama. This is when dozens of Republicans, at least 50 representatives and 12 senators, according to an Epoch Times tally, are planning to object to some certificates, alleging election irregularities, including voter fraud and failure to follow state election results. That will trigger a withdrawal from the joint session and a 2-hour debate followed by votes in each chamber. Only with the majority vote from both the House and the Senate would a challenge be upheld, which even supporters find unlikely considering that Democrats who control the House and Senate Republican leadership, including McConnell, have expressed disapproval over the plan to object. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, in a letter to colleagues on January 3rd, noted that objections can happen, but that at the end of the day, Biden will be officially declared our next president. Our choice is not to use the forum to debate the presidency of Donald Trump, she said. Representatives Ron Estes of Kansas, Tracy Mann of Kansas, and Jacob Turner of Kansas, all Republicans, said on January 3rd that they'll join in the objections, saying in a statement that several states are facing serious allegations of voter fraud and violations of their own state law. This action is not taken lightly and comes after extensive study and research, they said. Kansas deserves to know that all legal and only legal votes will be counted. We hope our actions begin to restore the confidence of tens of millions of our fellow Americans that feel their sacred right to vote is under attack. Representatives Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, and Richard Hudson, Republican of North Carolina, also announced on January 3rd that they will object, but 7 Republican representatives, including several strong Trump supporters, said they won't join in the effort and denounced the move. Of the 6 states to which questions have been raised, 5 have legislatures that are controlled by Republicans, and they all have the power to send a new slate of electoral votes to Congress if they deem such action appropriate under state law. Unless that happens between now and January 6, 2021, Congress will have no authority to influence the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, the group wrote in a statement. To take action otherwise, that is, to unconstitutionally insert Congress into the center of the presidential election process, would amount to stealing power from the people in the states. It would, in effect, replace the Electoral College with Congress, and in so doing, strengthen the efforts of those on the left who are determined to eliminate it or render it irrelevant. The weekend saw a flurry of action with 11 senators following Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, in announcing that they join in the objections unless Congress appoints a commission to examine alleged election irregularities. The idea is modeled on the panel formed in 1877 amid a contested election. Hawley's December 30th announcement triggered a number of House members to announce their intention to object. The number planning to do so has more than doubled since then. A segment of Republicans are focusing on Pence's role in the proceedings. They had sued the vice president and asked the court to rule that he has the executive authority to decide between dueling electors. A judge dismissed the case and an appeals court rejected an appeal. Pence had asked the court to dismiss the suit, but said through a spokesman on January 2nd that he supports efforts to challenge electoral votes. Vice President Pence shares the concerns of millions of Americans about voter fraud and irregularities in the last election. Pence's chief of staff, Mark Schwartz, said in the statement sent to media outlets. Now, interestingly enough, Democrats had objected 3 times to the Electoral College certification since 2001, and they were praised for it, yet Republicans do it and they're not. Got this from the Daily Signal, where it says that recent precedents for challenging Electoral College certification in Congress have come not from Republican lawmakers, but from Democrats. Over the past 20 years, Democrats have on 3 separate occasions objected to the validity of electoral votes on the floor of Congress. Wednesday, January 6th, will mark the first time Republicans choose to do so in the past 2 decades. I cannot vote to certify the Electoral College results on January 6th without raising the fact that some states, particularly Pennsylvania, failed to follow their own state election laws. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, wrote in a statement on December 30th. About a dozen Republican senators and about 140 GOP House members are expected to challenge electoral slates during Wednesday's joint session of Congress. On January 2nd, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, released a joint statement with 10 other GOP lawmakers announcing that they intend to vote on January 6th to reject the electors from disputed states that are not regularly given and lawfully certified, the statutory requisite, unless and until that emergency 10-day audit is completed. In the statement, Cruz called upon Congress to appoint an electoral commission with full investigatory and fact-finding authority to conduct an audit of election results before Inauguration Day on January 20th. Once the audit was completed, states would evaluate the commission's findings and could convene a special legislative session to certify a change in the vote if needed. Since the passage of the Electoral Count Act of 1877, which provides a legal avenue for members of Congress to challenge electoral votes under the Constitution, Democrat lawmakers have objected to election outcomes on several occasions, including in 2001 and 2005, and as recently as 2017. In 2001, House Democrats challenged the certification of electoral votes for then Texas Governor George W. Bush, a Republican, but the objection failed because no senator agreed to sign the written objection. The objection is in writing, and I do not care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate. Representative Maxine Waters, Democrat California, said during the 2001 joint session of Congress, the chair will advise that the rules do care, then Vice President Al Gore, ceremoniously presiding over the session, told Waters, Gore was overseeing the very session that would confirm his loss to Bush. A similar situation occurred in 2017 when then Vice President Joe Biden oversaw a certification of the electoral votes that handed the presidency to Donald Trump. House Democrats challenged the electoral slate, but to no avail because they lacked support in the Senate. It is over, Biden told Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington, who objected to the election results during the 2017 session. The certification challenge in 2005 was the only instance in recent years in which both a senator and a House member signed an official objection to an electoral slate. Then Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones, Democrat of Ohio, and then Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California, together challenged Bush's victory in Ohio on grounds of alleged voter irregularities. The House and Senate adjourned and met separately for no more than 2 hours, as the Constitution stipulates, but ultimately neither Jones nor Boxer was able to gain enough votes from their respective colleagues to alter Ohio's electoral slate. A tweet Monday from conservative author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza shared a video compilation of some of the times Democrat lawmakers have objected to Electoral College certification over the past 20 years. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat Illinois, praised Boxer for her actions in 2005, saying, "Some may criticize our colleague from California for bringing us here for this brief debate. I thank her for doing that because it gives members an opportunity once again on a bipartisan basis to look at a challenge that we faced not just in the last election in one state, but in many states." Durbin subsequently voted to certify Bush's win of Ohio, however. Now, in response to Hawley's statement and announcing his intent to object to the Electoral College certification on January 6, Durbin wrote in a tweet on December 30th that Hawley was engaging in the political equivalent of barking at the moon. "This won't be taken seriously, nor should it be," Durbin continued. "It appears unlikely that the challenges made by GOP senators and House members will alter the election outcome, given that a majority vote is required in both chambers of Congress to overturn the state's electoral slate." Now, that statement right there by Durbin, comparing what he did in 2005 and praising Boxer for her actions, and then saying just last Wednesday that Hawley was engaging in the political equivalent of barking at the moon, and that it should be taken seriously, is just the problem that we're seeing now. I mean, to me, I think that is just two-faced. I mean, you know, that's just my opinion. Take it what you will. You have your own opinions. I appreciate your comments, your responses in the comments below about that. And also in that article, it mentioned GOP senators calling for an election commission, which was last used in 1876. I'll get more into that tomorrow with another article from the Daily Signal. However, we have this from sarahcarter.com. A group of GOP senators is planning to challenge electoral votes during the official counting before a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. They are opposing to encourage Congress to create an electoral commission to investigate voter fraud like what was used in the 1876 election that resulted in the election of Rutherford B. Hayes. Unlike the recently thrown out lawsuit led by Republican Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas, which sought to give Mike Pence the authority to deem which electors are valid and which will cast a vote for president, this new call is seeking a commission to study election fraud and irregularities in swing states and to make a decision on who should get electoral votes. This has happened before, the last time being in 1876, and it resulted in Rutherford B. Hayes winning the presidency, as reported by Fox News, as reported by SarahCarter.com. At least 12 senators and senators-elect are planning to object to this certification on Wednesday. The group now includes Republican Senators Ted Cruz of Texas, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, James Lankford of Oklahoma, Steve Daines of Montana, John Kennedy of Louisiana, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, and Mike Brown of Indiana. Also, several senators-elect plan to object, including Republican Senators Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, Roger Marshall of Kansas, Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. We should follow that precedent. To wait, Congress should immediately appoint an electoral commission with full investigatory and fact-finding authority to conduct an emergency 10-day audit of the election returns in the disputed states. Once completed, the individual states would evaluate the commission's findings and could convene a special legislative session to certify a change in their vote if needed, the statement said. The last time this was implemented was in 1877, following the 1876 election, as reported by Fox. Election results from some of the states were disputed, and Congress set up the commission to determine who the electoral vote should go to. In the end, all 19 of the votes were given to Hayes, and he won the election by one electoral vote. Some GOP senators, like Lindsey Graham, are not getting behind the effort. Instead, he called it a political dodge. Graham tweeted out on on Sunday, proposing a commission at this late date, which has zero chance of becoming reality, is not effectively fighting for President Trump. It appears to be more of a political dodge than an effective remedy. Senator Langford told Fox it's actually very simple. We've asked a very simple question. Can we put together an electoral commission, have 5 senators, 5 House members, 5 members of the Supreme Court? Langford told Fox News. This is exactly how it was set up in 1876 when there were 3 states that had all kinds of fraud issues. And so the Election Commission was set up at that time in 1876, just like this, to be able to study it, look at it, make recommendations. We think that's a good plan. Obviously, there are millions and millions of Americans who think there were major issues with the election. Wednesday will involve many elected officials pulling different stops to ensure whether either Biden or President Trump wins, including perhaps resulting in techniques not used since the 1800s. Now, I had just glanced at that, but I've not actually researched that. I might do so tomorrow or sometime later on today, but yeah, I mean, it is something to definitely take a look at, and if not used for this election, probably maybe have it ready by 2024. Hey, why not? I mean, there are a lot of Republicans who might be waiting in the wings come 2024, so who knows just what might happen. Anyway, leave a comment below as to what you think on this, and I'll see you in the next one. As we speak, Congress is certifying the Electoral College results, though there might be some discussion about it and debate from from the 6 states that Trump had challenged. So what happens at this? I've mentioned some of it in previous videos, but here's a little more from our good friends at the Daily Signal. 6 things you need to know about as Congress debates the Electoral College vote. President Donald Trump sounded confident during a rally Monday night in Georgia about his chances for victory after the House and Senate convened a joint session Wednesday to count the Electoral College votes for president. But the probability of altering former Vice President Joe Biden's lead of 302 votes to Trump's 232 votes in the Electoral College seems very low, even with the House and Senate poised to debate certification of some states for Biden amid allegations of voter fraud and election irregularities. Thousands of Trump supporters were expected in Washington for a Stop the Steal rally on Wednesday outside the Capitol, where the certification of votes will be debated. Whatever happens, this will almost certainly mark the end of the tumultuous 2020 presidential election. Whether there is any chance to change the outcome, the lawmakers' debate will offer a grand political theater. Here's what you need to know before the big day. What's the role of Vice President Mike Pence? Vice President Mike Pence, in his role as President of the Senate, will preside over the joint session of Congress. What Pence can do and what he will do are becoming the biggest questions. Article 2 of the Constitution and the 12th Amendment say that the President of the Senate, in this case Pence, shall, and the Presidents of the House and Senate, open all the certificates and the votes shall then be counted. The language of the 12th Amendment reads, the President of the Senate shall, and the Presidents of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates and votes shall then be counted. The person having the great number of votes for president shall be the president. If such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person has such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. And Trump is putting public pressure on Pence not to open the electors' votes from some states suspected of being fraudulent. I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Trump told the Georgia crowd Monday night, of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like McCarthy as much. No, Mike's a great guy. He's a great man and a smart man. President also tweeted Tuesday the vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors. And it goes on to say that there was a lawsuit that I had read about the lawsuit and it says that the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia rejected the Goldman suit with an opinion Monday from Judge James Boasberg, an Obama appointee, that said the Goldman argument lies somewhere between a willful misreading of the Constitution and fantasy, and it's a long article, but constitutional lawyer Tara Ross said that Vice President Pence does not have the authority to intervene and decide the election. And she agrees that there are some open constitutional questions about the Electoral Count Act. The Electoral College is about state sovereignty and how states choose a president, and that this could open the door to a full-fledged partisan fighting and states could lose their voice. And it says that on a week, and Chuck Grassley tweeted out on a weekly press call with AG with reporters. Chuck Grassley and discussed as well as President pro tempore presiding over the Senate tomorrow during expected Electoral College certification debate when VP isn't present. Keywords: Senate debate. Number two, how will the process work? Congress passed the Electoral Count Act of 1887 in response to the aftermath of the controversial 1876 presidential election. The law established a procedure for challenging the counting of the Electoral College votes. If an objection is signed by one House member and one senator, the joint session of Congress will adjourn and the House and Senate will separately debate the objection for 2 hours. After each chamber votes on the matter, the joint session will reconvene. Representative Mo Brooks, Republican Alabama, has announced that he would lead a challenge to counting electoral votes from states where election procedures were controversial. More than 100 other House Republicans say they intend to join the objections. And it says that so far 12 senators, starting with Senator Josh Hawley, announced that he would join the objection. Now, for the objections to change the outcome in any state, it would require a simple majority in the House and Senate. That seems unlikely since many Senate Republicans oppose the objections and Democrats control the House. Number three, so how long will the debate run? How long the congressional debate goes depends mostly on how the lawmakers' objections are written. The Trump campaign brought litigation in 7 states, all of which have an alternative slate of Trump electors. These states are Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. An opposition could oppose a count in all, some, or one of the states, depending on how it is written, said Hans von Spakovsky, manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation. So debate time in the House and Senate could be as little as 2 hours if the targeted states are debated together. It could go as long as 14 hours if all 7 states are debated separately. That's on top of the time it will take the joint session to certify the electors' votes. Procedurally speaking, each of the 50 states in the District of Columbia will be read off in alphabetical order before the results are certified. And it goes on to say that Hawley singled out one state and his famous "I cannot vote to certify the Electoral College results on January 6th without raising the fact that some states, particularly Pennsylvania, fail to follow their own state election laws." Number 4, so will lawmakers present evidence? Some House members have said that they would present evidence of election irregularities. Trump indicated in a tweet Monday that evidence will be put forward Wednesday. Trump tweeted out on Sunday, or rather on Monday, how can you certify an election when the number is being certified or verifiably wrong? You will see the real numbers tonight during my speech, but especially on January 6th. Senator Tom Cotton, Republicans have plus and minuses, but one thing is sure, they don't forget. More than 1/3 of Americans, or 39%, say they believe the election was rigged, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. Broken down by party, that's two-thirds of Republicans surveyed, 17% of Democrats, and almost a third of independent voters. And it goes on to say that Trump's legal team had presented sworn affidavits for more than 1,000 people, and state legislatures in 5 states have held hearings examining claims of problems with voter machines, ballots sent to vacant addresses, suitcases full of ballots, duplicate ballots, and other matters. There's been a clear lack of curiosity for much of the mainstream media on such questions, Ross said. After the election, both Congress and state legislatures should investigate, she said. And it goes on to say that no matter who is inaugurated on January 20th, half the country will believe the president is illegitimate, Ross said. It should be more like 2000. You always have Republican and Democrat lawyers debating with news commentators. People were upset, but the transparency helped with the acceptance. This is likely the final chance to present evidence. Tommy Binion, Vice President for Government Relations at the Heritage Foundation, told the Daily Signal podcast in describing the process. Now, is this definitely the end? Inauguration day for the president is January 20th, and it would seem unlikely that anything could change after Congress certifies the Electoral College vote count. However, according to the liberal news site Daily Beast, two anonymous sources familiar with the matter say that Trump plans to keep fighting after Wednesday. The article quotes one of the sources as claiming to have had a conversation with Trump. After Congress certifies the Electoral College results, it's not clear what legal avenues Trump could use to continue fighting the election outcome, Ross said. This would be completely unprecedented, Ross said. That has never been an issue before that I'm aware of. Number 6, what happened before? Even before the 1887 law, Congress ran into an unusual circumstance regarding how to certify the Electoral College vote count. It had nothing to do with the outcome. President Ulysses S. Grant won a landslide victory in 1872 over Horace Greeley, earning 260 electoral votes of Greeley's 66. However, before electors met, Greeley died. All but 3 of the pledged Greeley electors gave their votes to someone else. It was up to Congress to deal with those 3. After 1872, there was a dispute on how to count electoral votes for Horace Greeley, Ross said. Congress determined that they would not count those votes because Greeley couldn't be counted as a person under the Constitution. Now, only twice since the passage of the Electoral Count Act of 1887 has an objection been sustained by both a House member and a senator in 1969 and 2005. However, after Republican victories in modern presidential races, it has become routine for House Democrats to make objections on the floor, rarely gaining a Senate sponsor. On January 6, 2017, House Democrats made 11 objections to Trump's victory over Democrat Hillary Clinton. Biden, then the outgoing vice president, presided over the session and as well as Senate president, and asked whether any objection had a Senate sponsor. None did, so the joint session continued. After the votes were counted, Biden said, "It's over," making Trump's victory official. In 2000, Gore, then vice president, conceded the presidential election to then Texas Governor George W. Bush. After the Supreme Court ruled against his campaign's efforts to win Florida, the Electoral College voted for Bush. However, more than a dozen House Democrats made 20 separate objections during the joint session on January 6, 2001, 20 years ago to the day. Gore, presiding over the session, asked each time for a Senate sponsor and each time got no one. Gore gavelled out the session and certified his opponent Bush as the winner. In 2005, Democrats alleged voting irregularities in Ohio after Bush won re-election in 2004 over then Senator John Kerry, Democrat, Massachusetts. Then Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones, Democrat of Ohio, and then Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat, California, objected in writing to Ohio's electoral votes for Bush. Boxer called that objection her proudest moment on the Senate floor, according to CNN. "Our intent was not to overturn the election in any way," Boxer said. "Our intent was to focus on voter suppression in Ohio." Both chambers withdrew to consider the objection, and then, in separate votes, the House and Senate each rejected the objection. The Senate voted 74-1 against it. It's the 2005 challenge. The House 267-31. At the time, the Republicans controlled both the House and Senate. Then House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, praised the effort. This is their only opportunity to have this debate while the country is listening, and it is appropriate to do so. If there were other venues of this caliber, we would have taken that opportunity. Pelosi, now House Speaker, said in 2005, but this is the opportunity. We have a responsibility to take advantage of it. In the 1968 presidential election, Republican Richard Nixon defeated Democrat Hubert Humphrey and Independent George Wallace, a rare third-party candidate, to win some electoral votes. In January 6, 1969, then Representative James O'Hara, Democrat of Michigan, and then Democrat Senator Edmund S. Muskie of Maine objected in writing to counting the vote of a faithless elector from North Carolina who voted for Wallace, even though Nixon had won the state. The Senate voted 55-33 against the objection, the House 228-70. At the time, Democrats controlled both the House and Senate. When the joint session resumed, the challenge electoral vote was counted for Wallace, a former Democrat, who won a total of 46 electoral votes after carrying 5 states. Simply reaching a debate is tough, Binion noted, and changing the result of a presidential election is even tougher. It's a pretty high hurdle to clear that you need a member of the House and a member of the Senate together to object in writing, and then both chambers need to debate and vote on that, Binion said on the podcast. So it's not surprising that it has happened before. It's not surprising that it's happening now. And we should all be comforted by the fact that if the election results are going to be changed, passing that hurdle, it's an extremely high bar. And that's totally true. I mean, you know, we are seeing it now, and according to the Epoch Times, Trump is committed to challenging the election beyond the joint session on January 6th. Got this from my good friends over at the Epoch Times. President Donald Trump intends to continue pursuing challenges to the outcome of the 2020 election in as many as 8 states, regardless of the result of the joint session of Congress on January 6, when lawmakers will vet and count electoral college votes. During a January 4th rally at an airfield in Dalton, Georgia, the president told a crowd of thousands of supporters to expect more news about the challenges to the election over the next 2 weeks. You watch what happens over the next couple of weeks. You watch what's going to come out. Watch what's going to be revealed, the president said. This was a rigged election, but we're fighting it, and you'll see what's going to happen. You can lose, and that's acceptable. You lose, you lose. But when you win in a landslide and they steal it and it's rigged, it's not acceptable. Trump later said he'll be in Georgia to campaign against Republican Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in about a year and a half, which suggests that the president views a post-election challenge as a long-term battle. Kemp and Raffensperger, who certified former Vice President Joe Biden as a winner of the election in the Peach State, both have been largely uncooperative with Trump's request to audit the election. Most recently, they objected to a signature audit in Fulton County, the state's most populous county, according to Trump. The president was in Georgia to drum up support for Senator Kelly Loeffler and Senate candidate David Perdue for the runoff election set to conclude on January 5th. While Loeffler and Perdue have both committed to objecting to slates of Biden electors from certain states during the joint congressional session on January 6th, it is unclear if either will participate since the results of the runoff elections may not be known for days. The importance of the joint session has continued to grow as dozens of lawsuits by Trump's legal team and a handful of third parties have been dismissed by courts in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. Now, only a handful of the cases featured evidentiary hearings, while the vast majority were dismissed on procedural grounds. Trump added a layer of significance to the events on January 6 by issuing an unprecedented call for supporters to descend on Washington as that day for a big and wild protest. Some of the organizers believe the event may turn into the biggest Trump rally in history. More than 100 members of the U.S. House of Representatives have committed to objecting to slates of Biden electors on January 6, according to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. At least 74 have done so publicly, according to a tally by the Epoch Times, and a group of 13 senators has committed to adding their names to the objections. The objection plan appears to have split the GOP, with 27 Republicans in the House or in the Senate and at least 10 Republicans in the House opposing the idea. An objection to each state of electors will trigger 2 hours of debate, followed by a vote by each chamber on which states should be counted, Republican electors in 7 states have sent procedural electoral votes to Congress. Democrats have the majority in the House and enough Republican support in the Senate to certify the Biden electors. I hope Mike Pence comes through for us. Vice President Mike Pence, in his capacity as the president of the Senate, will lead the joint session set to begin at 1 p.m. on January 6, while the Electoral College Act restricts Pence's role to the opening of the envelopes containing the Electoral College votes. Some experts argue Pence has more options because the act could be unconstitutional. Fellow Republican Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas attempted to force a court to clarify Pence's role by suing the vice president. The lawsuit was tossed and Pence's options remain unclear. The vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors, Trump wrote on Twitter January 5th. I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, Trump said at the rally in Georgia the night before. If he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much. No, Mike's a great guy. He's a wonderful man and a smart man and a man that I like a lot. But he's going to have a lot to say about it. You know one thing with him, you're going to get straight shots. He's going to call it straight. Pence has spent hours huddling with Trump, staff, and the Senate parliamentarian ahead of the January 6 proceedings. People close to the vice president have stressed his respect for institutions and said they expect him to act in accordance with the law and follow the Constitution. David McIntosh, president of the Conservative Club for Growth and a friend of Pence, told the Associated Press, I think he will approach this as a constitutionalist, basically, and say, what's my role in the Constitution as president of the Senate? What he'll do is allow anybody who's going to move to object to be heard, but then abide by what the majority of the Senate makes the outcome. Pence was in Georgia on January 4th, campaigning for Leflin and Perdue. In a speech at Rock Springs Church in Milner, the vice president told the crowd that we'll have a day in Congress. The vice president subsequently made an extensive appeal to faith, suggesting that he doesn't view himself as being in a position to take an election-altering stand on January 6th. Even when things don't seem like they're going the way we expected, they're going the way he expected, Pence said, urging the audience to pray. He's just such a fighter. Trump supporters who attended the rally in Dalton, Georgia, appreciated Trump's relentless push to challenge the election results. I think he's just such a fighter, Amy Hicks, a homemaker from Muscle Shoals, Alabama, told the Epoch Times. While most Republican candidates, if they lost, they wouldn't fight for it. He's not the typical person or politician, and he never has been in his 4 years of office. If they certify tomorrow, Trump, I don't think he'll ever concede. He'll just move on. Thousands of supporters walked for half an hour on a pitch-dark road from the police checkpoint to the rally on the airfield at the Dalton Municipal Airport. The crowd broke into chants of 4 more years, fight for Trump, and stop the steal throughout the president's speech, suggesting that his view of the election is a done deal. It's within his right to fight as long and hard as he can. Based on our Constitution, Glenn Ruggiero of Canton, Georgia, told the Epoch Times, to just give up because you don't want to divide the country. We're already divided. To give up because you want a smooth transition, we can transition anytime. As long as he's following what's been provided for him within the Constitution from our founding fathers, I believe he should fight to the very end. And apparently that is what is happening. I mean, before I had started this video, I had heard that there was a challenge to the Arizona Electoral Vote Count. So who knows what's going to happen. However, there is some big news. Actually, this makes for some huge news. And this coming from Town Hall. Pennsylvania State Senate asked Congress to postpone certifying the election results. Members of the Pennsylvania State Senate on Tuesday sent a letter to House Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican California, asking them to postpone certifying the results of the 2020 presidential election. Congress will gather on Wednesday to prove whether or not to certify the Electoral College's decision to name Joe Biden as the next president. According to the letter, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, Democrat Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar, and the Rogue Supreme Court violated the state constitution by implementing absentee ballot laws that contradicted state law. From the letter, Act 77 of 2019 that was signed into law provides the following clear provisions. Number one, all mail-in ballots must be received by 8 p.m. election night. Number two, officials at polling places must authenticate their signatures of voters. Number three, county election boards must begin pre-canvassing of absentee and mail-in ballots after 8 a.m. on election day. Number four, poll watchers selected by candidates and political parties are permitted to observe the process of canvassing absentee and mail-in ballots. Number five, no provisions were made for drop-off boxes or curing of ballots. Now, 7 weeks before the 2020 general election, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overstepped their bounds by ruling that, number one, mail-in ballots could be received and counted up to 3 days later. Number two, ballots mailed without a postmark should be or would be counted. Number three, signatures on mail-in ballots would not need to be verified. The state senators asked for the postponement, especially as the United States Supreme Court is expected to decide if they will hear the Donald J. Trump for president versus Kathy Hochul, Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania case. That court case addresses each of the issues the state senators have. And Representative Paul Gosar tweeted out, the Pennsylvania Senate sent the following letter. We will make sure that Vice President and President Trump receive. Now that is rather interesting. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. But you know what? There is a very interesting question. What can be done in this age of overall election fraud, and whom can we count on? Got the answer. Got a little bit of the answer from the American Thinker, and with an article entitled "What Can Be Done in This Age of Election Fraud, and Whom Can We Count On?" by Donald Finley. Here's a question. Since the U.S. Constitution provides for the legislatures of each respective state to choose their representing electors of the Electoral College, with the U.S. as a constitutional republic, not a democracy, what happens when, internal to the state, that process breaks down? Whether by state executives violating their own state law to change the conduct of the election to countermand the legislatively approved laws, or by those same legislatively approved laws being usurped by judges, the final result is an inaccurate count of the votes cast. Here's another. When the state certifies as true and accurate the vote totals known not to be true and accurate, but refuses to acknowledge the inaccuracy, who fixes that wrong? I listened to President Trump's entire phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State, and contrary to most of the characterizations you'll read, it was not a desperate ploy on the part of the president. It was just that by Raffensperger. The president gave detailed numbers of the fraudulent votes in Georgia, demonstrating a mastery of the pertinent data. He offered a simple solution, listing several categories of illegal votes with the respective numbers in that category. Raffensperger only had to correct one or two categories, and the margin would flip toward Trump victory. The president gave numbers for dead people who voted, those who weren't registered voters, those who voted without any address, those with only P.O. box addresses, those who live out of the state, those who were turned away because their votes had been cast by someone else, and the current estimate for the suitcase ballots pulled out in the famous video. President Trump made it easy for Raffensperger to fix the problem, not caring if he was declared the winner by 500,000 votes or only one vote, but making it clear that he was the winner and Joe Biden was not. It was easy to prove, and it wasn't even close. The president emphasized transparency and the truth. He wasn't negotiating a shady deal. He offered Raffensperger a face-saving way out of being known to history as the overseer and certifier of a massive fraud. Well, Raffensperger blew his opportunity. He stuck to his line that the allegations made in Georgia had already been investigated and none of them is true. He insisted that the data used by the Trump campaign and legal team are not accurate. Of the 4,500 or so voters who had moved out of Georgia yet still voted, he said all but two had moved back and were legal voters. Trump lawyers asked for the investigative reports for the data held not only by the Secretary of State's office, for any of the information that would shed greater light on what happened, but got nothing. As Andrea Woodberg so clearly wrote on American Thinker, something is not right with Raffensperger. I had hoped to hear in that phone call an attempt to address my questions. Perhaps an effort at some level to correct a horrible wrong. Who better than those who made the mess at cleaning it up? But those who made it still don't acknowledge it, which shows even more clearly the systemic corruption President Trump has been fighting and the flaws in our processes that allowed all the cheating to take place. More fundamentally, it reveals what's missing, and that is the effort by the truly innocent to prove that there was no wrongdoing. Everyone knew that President Trump's win in 2016 was an unexpected but righteous victory. The Democrats cried and made some lame allegations, claimed their legitimacy, but there were no incidents, vote videos, affidavits, or data scientists pointing to people, places, and events indicative of illegal activity. It took over 3 years for them to get a recorded phone call with the Ukrainian president for them to fabricate evidence for impeachment. The Trump team has orders of magnitude greater evidence right now of various provable illegalities and fraudulent activities that drew a consistent thread to follow across at least 6 states. Many were easily identifiable and, under normal election procedures, would simply represent votes thrown out of the count totals. The data are conclusive yet imprecise, which throws a cloud over the challenges because the anonymity of voting obscures the exact numbers. The number of votes is exact, but for whom these votes or those votes were cast can be elusive. The fallacy is that if 4,500 votes were cast by people who don't live in the state and illegally voted, then subtracting 4,500 votes from Joe Biden's total somehow disenfranchises 4,500 voters. They were illegal votes. They should never have been cast by anyone, and no one is disenfranchised. It's the same for dead people, no addresses, unregistered voters. All are illegal, and no one loses his legal vote. There must be rules in any process, and the rules written to ensure election security were legally changed or ignored to expressly allow fraud, which the Democratic election workers, activists, and elected officials fully exploited to steal the election for Biden. The threat of Democrat actions leading up to and during the election shows this unequivocally. There is evidence more every day, and it's overwhelming and irrefutable. That is why all illegal votes should come off Biden's total. The Democrats perpetrated the illegalities. They were the guardians who kept Republican poll workers from being observers. They were the party filing the lawsuits to change the election rules. Yet their public statements relate Joe Biden's clear victory with over 80 million votes. How many were actually was for Trump but changed to Biden? How many were completely fabricated? There is little doubt that Biden did not get 80 million votes, and the embarrassment of Donald Trump's refusal to accept his loss and the damage he is doing to democracy by making so many unfounded allegations. The arrogance of it all should offend every patriotic and honest American. Neither Biden nor any of his handlers is attempting to add transparency, to prove there was no fraud, to provide alternative explanations, or to shore up legitimacy for the incoming administration. They don't care what Americans think, and they blatantly, openly, and proudly flaunt their victory and ignore the evidence. The Democrat Party is completely eviscerated in one election cycle, many political tradition and constitutional norm, not to mention the Constitution itself and countless state laws. And Democrats offer no apologies for the damage they have done. They continue to blame the Trump administration for what they themselves have done and are doing, as well as revisiting the disproven Mueller probe and impeachment debacle, all while paving new depths uncharted ever in human history of criminal election fraud. What the answers appear to be to my questions above? Nothing and nobody. Think about who has stolen our government. These are the same people, many in the exact same person, who helped weaponize our intelligence apparatus against an incoming, then a sitting president. Vice abuses, framing General Flynn, Spygate, FBI agent techs, Steele dossier, many more. I know, all business. But the players are still in the game, and rather than lose a turn as would have been fitting, they get to play again. They sabotage Trump's transition, but then they sabotage his entire presidency, and then they stole his reelection. Anywhere else in the world, that would be called a successful coup. They cannot be trusted, they cannot be taken at their word, and they cannot be permitted to destroy the America that Trump has made great again. That is a very wow. Only word I have to say for it is wow. I mean, that is a very hard hitting article. So true, and there will be 14 hours of debate because it goes. There are 6 or 7 states that are that the Republicans might object to. Each 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 debate will take up to 2 hours, so we're looking probably close to about 3 a.m. that things might be totally done. I don't know, but I'll keep you updated on this tomorrow. And leave a comment below as to what you think about all this, and I'll see you in the next one. Well, yesterday was supposed to be a peaceful certification of the Electoral College vote, but apparently it was not. Because there was a 4 hour or more riot and protest on the nation's capital. Got your update for you on that. This coming from the Washington Free Beacon. Pro-Trump protesters stormed Capitol amid challenge to his election loss. Protesters supporting Donald Trump swarmed the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday, putting it on lockdown as Vice President Mike Pence rebuffed the president's demand to overturn his loss to Democrat Joe Biden, and the Senate's Republican leader denounced a bid in Congress to undo the election outcome. Trump supporters overturned barricades and clashed with police on the U.S. Capitol grounds and steamed inside the building. The demonstrations flared as lawmakers met inside to formally certify Biden's victory over Trump. In the November 3rd election, law enforcement authorities struggled to maintain order. The Senate and House of Representatives, which were weighing up objections to Biden's victory by a band of pro-Trump Republican lawmakers, abruptly and unexpectedly recessed. Pence, a loyal lieutenant during the 4 years of Trump's tumultuous presidency, presided over the opening of the joint session of Congress to formally certify Biden's November 3rd victory over Trump. A band of Republican lawmakers quickly challenged the results, first from the election battleground state of Arizona, won by Biden. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell objected to the efforts, saying, if this election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral. McConnell helped give Trump some of his biggest accomplishments of his presidency, including deep tax cuts and confirmation of conservative judicial nominees. Biden won the election by 306 to 232 in the state-by-state electoral college, and by more than 7 million ballots in the national popular vote. But Trump continues to falsely claim that there was widespread fraud and that he was a victor. The voters, courts, and states have all spoken, McConnell said on the Senate floor. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever, he added. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer called the challenges an attempted coup and said that Congress does not determine the outcome of an election, the people do. Pence turned away Trump's demand that the vice president unilaterally rejects state electoral votes on the same day Trump's fellow Republicans were poised to lose their majority in the Senate. The joint session of Congress could last past midnight. We will never give up, Trump earlier told thousands of cheering supporters on a grassy expanse near the White House called the Ellipse. We will never concede if it doesn't happen. You don't succeed when there's theft involved. Trump in his speech applied fresh pressure to Pence to try to reverse the election results. In a statement, Pence said he shares the concerns about the integrity of the election, but that is not correct that he should be able to accept or reject the electoral votes unilaterally. The U.S. Constitution does not give Pence the power to unilaterally overturn the results of the election, but he is under pressure to do so from Trump. And yesterday's protest was totally out of control. I mean, as Susan Ferricchio from the Washington Examiner points out in her article that protesters describe Capitol chaos. Protesters who were part of an unprecedented 4-hour siege of the U.S. Capitol Monday told the Washington Examiner they planned a peaceful occupation of the building, but some people in their group turned violent. It just got crazy, that's all I can say, a protester from Michigan told the Washington Examiner as he walked away from the Capitol hauling a Trump flag. Hundreds of protesters who were among a throng that marched to the Capitol broke through barricades and past the police, in some ways forcing their way into the building, which they believed they had the right to access. The two congressional chambers were evacuated and lawmakers were taken to secure locations. Thousands of Trump supporters gathered in Washington, D.C. Wednesday to protest the certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory by Congress. They believe President Trump's message that Biden won the election fraudulently and went to and inside the Capitol to register their objection. I thought we would be able to peacefully enter, a protester who traveled from Texas told the Washington Examiner. I didn't know we'd be prevented from entering. The protester from Texas said the throng at first acted peacefully, but this order escalated when Capitol Police moved to prevent them from mounting these front stairs and entering through the center door. He climbed to the top with the rest of the protesters, where he and others clashed with police. From moment one, there was resistance from the police officers to allow us to access the public building, the protester said. Some protesters, he said, got out of control. They just got straight out of control. A man named Jeff from Granite City, Illinois, described the clash and said police were shoving protesters, so much that they pushed a guy through a shutter, which pushed him into the building. The man added that a woman got shot. Police have not disclosed the identity of the woman who was hit in the neck and taken from the building in a stretcher. News reports confirmed she later died. While the Capitol siege was described by many as a coup, the dozen protesters interviewed by the Washington Examiner denied it and said their objection was intended to be akin to demonstrations in which activists occupy public buildings. If they are sitting there as a peaceful protest, it's basically a sit-in. A protester named Nick from St. Louis, Missouri said, eventually they're going to run them out of there. One small group of men said they walked into the Capitol without resistance through the house side door and were allowed to enter by police but were told to stay away from certain areas. They were not blocking people from coming into the building, Nick from St. Louis said. Nick and his group sat on benches in the rotunda for about 15 minutes until a cop comes up with an M15 strapped to him and says, you guys gotta get up. You guys can't sit here. The officer did not make them leave the building, but rather told them to remain in the center of the rotunda. Jeff from Illinois told the Washington Examiner that he blamed the violence on the young kids and said that the vast majority of the protesters were peaceful, even though they entered the Capitol against the wishes of the police. Some of the protesters were breaking windows and kicking doors, Jeff said, adding that he and a friend blocked the protester from breaking into one room outside the Senate. Protesters described an escalating situation with the police. The police presence just kept picking up, Jeff from Granite City said. I think they were just waiting to see what reaction they were going to get, to figure out how they were going to execute their action. Among the thousands of protesters were many who never went near the Capitol and knew nothing of the chaos. I don't think it was super violent, Vala Miller, who traveled from Manistee, Michigan, told the Washington Examiner. People just want their voices heard. They are tired of promises not being kept, and they want answers. Now, what Viola Miller had said is exactly just what happened, during some of the events. And while I think that they were peaceful, a couple of them were brought about by, a couple of the protesters were possibly paid by BLM and Antifa for jumping in and, to jump in and wreak some havoc, just like we saw during Occupy Wall Street back during the Tea Party days, where there was a whole crush of people moving into a building, and many of them in the back, thought that they were just heading in and that it'd be just a peaceful sit-in. But it wasn't. Occupy Wall Street got violent. Good video to watch on that is Occupy Unmasked with Andrew Breitbart because he uncovered that. And I think that this is just one massive major blight on America, or America on American history. And as as our good friends from the Federalists say, the Capitol riot will hurt the people who are already hurting most. As protesters marched from the president's speech to the Capitol on Wednesday, making the scenic journey down Constitution Avenue, I met a mild-mannered woman who from the same corner of Wisconsin in which I grew up. She'd never voted before Donald Trump ran for president. She traveled to the Capitol because she loves the president. Not long after our conversations, hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. They climbed the walls, pushed past police, and roamed the halls, destroying property and taking selfies. A 14-year-old Air Force veteran did not leave the building alive. It was a disgraceful sight. There are those who believe Antifa showed up to incite chaos. It's possible that such an attempt was made, but even if it was, there was simply no way around the fact that hundreds of Trump supporters broke into the Capitol. Thousands more chose not to participate, leaving elite or watching from a distance. From my vantage point on the east side of the Capitol, I saw genuine Trump supporters rushing up the staircase by the dozens until the crowd was too dense to move. I saw a few urinate on trees just outside the building, barely shielded from mimicking the crowd. I saw them climbing the walls. Some chanted, "Whose house? Our house." Some chanted, "Do your job." Antifa may have mixed into the fray, but to accurately diagnose this deep wound, it's important to be crystal clear that some Trump supporters rioted. Indeed, many were proud to do it. If you'd rather not take my word from it, there's incontrovertible video evidence. I've been out talking to the protesters who busted into the Capitol. Washington Examiner reporter Susan Felicio tweeted, "One thing I'm hearing, they believe that they had a right to be in a public building and did not expect cops to block their accesses. Some were allowed in. A subset of this group, they said, got out of control." And so the blame game rages on. Rioting is the fault of the rioters, but they had just been told by the president that a landslide election had been stolen from him. Many people trust Donald Trump. They've been lied to by the media for years. They've been smeared as racist by elites and peers alike. With no other sources to turn to, they turn to the man who seems to hear them. He took advantage of that to lessen the blow of a narrow re-election loss. Love him or hate him, it turns out that Senator Ben Sasse, Republican in Nebraska, was right last week when he argued, the president and his allies are playing with fire. No senator believes Donald Trump defeated Joe Biden in a landslide. Many do, however, believe, and with good reason, that election irregularities occurred on a wider than acceptable scale. The people I spoke to today, most of whom were at a total loss for who to trust in the media, believe the president. He told them a landslide win was being stolen. That would be a crisis. They acted as such. What did he expect? For years now, Republicans have been pressed daily to strike a delicate balance, ignoring bad tweets to maintain a good working relationship with the president, beloved by many of their constituents. They had a reasonable argument for doing that. It pushed them to be more responsive to disenfranchised working class voters. It gave them a seat at the table. But in the waning days of Trump's tenure, one of the worst case scenarios of a loose-lipped president came to pass. Some lawmakers and pundits will use it as an excuse to be openly critical. Reasonable conservatives will trip over themselves to prove their reasonableness. Some will never with their fealty, or some will continue with their fealty, and others will pretend that they never did. And this is not vindication for the pundits who warned repeatedly Trump's rhetoric was dangerous. Far from it. First, many conservatives who support his policy agenda abhor his rhetoric and say as much. Some downplay it to avoid making negotiations impossible. But more than anything, it's not vindication because such pundits have a contempt for many of their decent, patriotic neighbors. They also excuse similar behavior on the left time and again. That, of course, does not vindicate anyone who stormed to cheer the surrounding of the Capitol either. Our elites are corrupt. The political establishment is not serving us well. These wounds will not be healed by sanctimonious Instagram posts, cable news monologues, egghead Twitter threads, or lofty speeches on the Senate floor, applauded by Broadway journalists who just pocketed $2,000 bonuses and rarely worry about feeding their families. In a sense, Wednesday will end in the same way it started with under a president known to be a flawed messenger for a deeply upset constituency. The woman from Wisconsin, who was kind enough to share her thoughts with me as she marched through the city, volunteered that even she, a Trump diehard who traveled across the country for a midweek rally, was not always happy with everything he said. But like everyone with whom I spoke, she eagerly insisted that she would follow Trump straight into a third party. It is a fault of the political class that Trump or Bernie Sanders feel like the only viable solutions to so many Americans. The capital bad will hurt the people who are already hurting most. The decent rally goers at a loss for answers, continually ignored and smeared, saddled with the baggage of violence that they did not commit. As the capital devolved into chaos, I overheard a protester walking away from the scene down the hill on the east side of Union Station mutter about the political establishment to his friend. It's like they're playing a game, he sighed, and everyone has a role to play but us. And that is so very true, right there with that. And I agree with that as well. It's a movie. We're all extras, or some of us are extras. Most of us are actors. But all many of us do is just sit back and just watch it play out. And if you want the situation report from what happened in DC, got this from the Center for Security Policy. Situation report: 4 dead as crowds overwhelmed Capitol Police, forced entering the Capitol during joint session. This from the Center for Security Policy. What happened in the upbeat carnival atmosphere, typical of President Trump's political rallies, ended in tragedy January 6th, with the deaths of 4 people and the disruption of the joint session of Congress where electoral votes were being counted. The chaos disrupted planned formal objections by a group of GOP senators and congressmen seeking to bring attention to the allegations of rampant voter fraud in key battleground states. The day began with a Save America march in the National Mall. The crowd reportedly reached hundreds of thousands of participants who had come to listen to speeches from President Donald Trump Jr., Rudy Giuliani, and others. After the speeches, the crowd began a pre-planned march into the Capitol. Shortly thereafter, clashes erupted at pre-placed barricades between Capitol Hill police and small groups of demonstrators who outnumbered police and, despite law enforcement launching non-lethal munitions into the group, reached the perimeter onto Capitol property. At this point, individuals from within the crowd began to direct the people into tighter and tighter confined spaces, packing them against police barricades in what only can be described as a pre-planned operation to reach the Capitol. In audio, one of these individuals can be heard saying, "Keep moving forward, no retreat." In another live stream video, a videographer can be heard expressing concern that people will be crushed. At about this time, the James Madison Library of Congress building and the Cannon House office buildings were evacuated after a reported bomb threat. Police later reported that devices described as pipe bombs were found outside the Republican National Committee and Democrat Committee offices and safely detonated by police EOD. Reports also indicate that police found what were described as a long gun and Molotov cocktails in a nearby cooler. Video taken from staff and press who were inside the Capitol showed door windows eventually being breached after being repeatedly battered, and crowds entering the Capitol from multiple points. From here, there appears to be multiple small groups moving through the Capitol with purpose, while the majority of the crowd appear bewildered or anxious to depart. In one video, a large crowd can be seen exiting the rotunda while remaining within the confines of a roped-off area and escorted by police. 4 people were killed during the action, 3 from what authorities described as medical emergencies. At least 1 individual can be seen falling from a height of of at least 50 feet. 1 individual, identified by media reports as Ashley Babbitt, a 15-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, was shot and killed by police inside the Capitol. Babbitt's social media showed indications of being a member of the online conspiracy theory community known as QAnon. It is not immediately clear from available video what led to the shooting. A plainclothes police officer can be seen firing through a barricade and striking Babbitt, who appears unarmed once in the chest. In a subsequent video, uniformed police officers with rifles appear immediately behind Babbitt and move to provide her with trauma care. Hopefully, more information about the shooting from the appropriate authorities will clarify the scene. In social media, debate rages over the identity of the perpetrators who initiated the action. Both mainstream media and conservative media identify the presence of known white supremacist provocateurs such as Matt Heimbach, formerly of the Traditional Workers' Party, inside the Capitol. In one video shared by Trump supporters, an individual can be seen battering a door window with some kind of club, while the crowd around him shouts Antifa and eventually pulls him down. Representative Mo Brooks, Republican Alabama, tweeted that Capitol Police had issued warnings of Antifa activity and that Antifa members were expected to infiltrate the Trump rally. While it is clear from Antifa's social media accounts that their members were present during the initial rally carrying out typical activities, such as taking photos and seeking to text participants, upon initial assessment, it appears unlikely that they were present in such numbers as to have been responsible for the initial breach. Following the event, most Antifa accounts have focused on doxing participants and complaining about what they regarded as a hands-off police policy against Trump supporters. While Capitol Police are typically used for confronting large protest crowds who routinely occupy House and Senate office buildings peacefully and without major incident, clearly the scale of the crowd and the timing of the event caught law enforcement off guard. Democrat Tim Ryan accused Capitol Police of strategic mistakes and indicated that some may lose their jobs over the incident. It remains unclear at this point whether the pipe bomb placements outside GOP offices, as well as the presence of firearms nearby, was linked to the incident at the Capitol, or part of an unrelated plot, something investigators are no doubt seeking to determine. I mean, it was a bad day for America yesterday, as far as that goes, and all we have to do is just continue to pray for those who were involved, and also pray for the nation. And I'm I'm just speechless, but all I have to do is continue to pray for the nation and pray for people on both sides. Actually, I mean, this affected all Americans and not just one small group. Leave a comment. Leave a comment below as to what you think about this, and I'll see you in the next one. President Trump yesterday condemned the riot that had happened at the Capitol on Wednesday, and it looks like he's finally conceding, if you will, the election to Joe Biden. This coming from the Associated Press. It says Trump finally faces reality amid talk of early ouster. With 13 days left in his term, President Donald Trump finally bent to reality Thursday amid growing talk of trying to force him out early, acknowledging he'll peacefully leave after Congress affirmed his defeat. Trump led off a video from the White House by condemning the violence carried out in his name a day earlier at the Capitol. Then, for the first time on camera, he admitted his presidency would end, though he declined to mention President-elect Joe Biden by name or explicitly state he had lost. And when administration will be inaugurated on January 20th, Trump said in the video, "My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power. This moment calls for healing and reconciliation." The address, which appeared designed to stave off talk of a forced early eviction, came at the end of the day when the corner president stayed out of sight in the White House, silence on some of his favorite internet lines of communication. He watched the resignations of several top aides, including 2 cabinet secretaries, and as officials sifted through the aftermath of the pro-Trump mob siege of the U.S. Capitol, there was growing a discussion of impeaching him a second time or invoking the 25th Amendment to oust him from the Oval Office. The invasion of the Capitol building, a powerful symbol of the nation's democracy, rattled Republicans and Democrats alike. The struggle was how best to contain the impulses of a president deemed too dangerous to control his own social media accounts, but who remains commander-in-chief of the world's greatest military. I'm not worried about the next election. I'm worried about getting through the next 14 days, said Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, one of Trump's staunchest allies. He condemned the president's role in Wednesday's riots and said, if something else happens, all options would be on the table. Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared that the President of the United States had incited an armed insurrection against America. She called him a very dangerous person who should not continue in office. This is urgent and an emergency of the highest magnitude. Neither option to remove Trump seemed likely with little time left in his term to draft the cabinet members needed to invoke the amendment or to organize the hearings and trial mandated for an impeachment. But the fact that the dramatic options were even the subject of discussion in Washington's corridors of power served as a warning to Trump. Fears of what a desperate president could do in his final days spread in the nation's capital and beyond, including speculation Trump could incite some more violence, make rash appointments, issue ill-conceived pardons, including for himself and his family, or even trigger a destabilizing international incident. The president's video Thursday, which was released upon his return to Twitter after his account was restored, was a complete reversal from the one he put out just 24 hours earlier, in which he said to the violent mob, "We love you, you're very special." His refusal to condemn the violence sparked a firestorm of criticism, and in the latest video, he at last denounced the demonstrators' lawless and mayhem. As for his feelings on leaving office, he told the nation that serving as a president has been the honor of my lifetime, while hinting at a return to the public arena. He told supporters, our incredible journey is only just beginning. Now, just a day earlier, Trump unleashed the destructive forces at the Capitol with his baseless claims of election fraud at a rally that prompted supporters to disrupt the congressional certification of Biden's victory. After the storming of the Capitol and the eventual re-hour certification of Biden's win by members of Congress, Trump released a statement that acknowledged he would abide by a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th. The statement was posted by an aide and did not originate from the president's own Twitter account, which has 88 million followers and for 4 years has been wielded as a political weapon that dictates policy and sows division and conspiracy. Now, Trump couldn't tweet it himself because, for the first time, the social media platform suspended his account, stating that the president had violated its rules of service by inciting violence. Facebook adopted a broader ban, saying Trump's account would be offline until after Biden's inauguration. Deprived of that social media lifeblood, Trump remained silent and ensconced in the executive mansion until Thursday evening, but around him loyalists headed for the exits. Their departures, which were coming in 2 weeks anyway, moved up to protest the president's handling of the riot. Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao became the first cabinet member to resign. Chao married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, one of the lawmakers trapped at the Capitol on Wednesday, said in a message to staff that the attack has deeply troubled me in a way that I cannot simply set aside. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos followed in her resignation letter Thursday. DeVos blamed Trump for inflaming tensions and the violent assault on the seat of the nation's democracy. There is no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is the inflection point for me, she wrote. Others who resigned in the wake of the riot, Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger, Ryan Tully, Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs at the National Security Council, and First Lady Melania Trump's Chief of Staff Stephanie Grisham, a former White House press secretary. Mick Mulvaney, Trump's former Chief of Staff turned Special Envoy to Northern Ireland, told CNBC that he had called Secretary of State to let him know that I was resigning. I can't do it. I just can't stay. Mulvaney said others who work for Trump had decided to remain in their posts in an effort to provide some sort of guardrails for the president during his final days of office. Those who choose to stay, and I have talked with some of them, are choosing to stay because they worry the president might put someone worse in, Mulvaney said. Mulvaney's predecessor in the Chief of Staff job, retired U.S. Marine Corps General John Kelly, told CNN, I think that Congress should meet and have a discussion about Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, allowing the forceful removal of Trump by his own cabinet. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer joined Pelosi in declaring that Trump should not hold office one day longer and urged Vice President Mike Pence on the cabinet act. But Chao's departure may stall nascent efforts to invoke the amendment. Staff-level discussions on the matter took place across multiple departments, and even in parts of the White House, according to two people briefed on the talks. But no member of the cabinet has publicly expressed support for the move, which would make Pence the acting president, though several were believed to be sympathetic to the notion, believing Trump is too volatile in his reigning days in office. In the West Wing, shell-shock days were packing up, acting on a delayed directive to begin offboarding their posts ahead of the Biden team's arrival. The slowdown before now was due to Trump's single-minded focus on his defeat since Election Day, at the expense of the other responsibilities of the office. Most glaringly, that included the fight against the raging coronavirus that is killing record numbers of Americans each day. Few aides had any sense of the president's plan, with some wondering if Trump would largely remain out of sight until he left the White House. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany read a brief statement in which she declared that the Capitol siege was appalling, reprehensible, and antithetical to the American way. But her words carried little weight. Trump has long made clear that he only speaks for his presidency. Now, I find that a little bit interesting, a little bit intriguing with that, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see just what'll happen these next 12 days now. But yeah, I mean, it's just very intriguing and interesting what'll be happening. And of course, I have a couple of other articles on the Capitol siege, and there is one that Biden had said that if this were BLM, then they would have been treated very differently. Like I said, this coming from my friends over at the Daily Signal. President-elect Joe Biden on Thursday said Black Lives Matter activists would have been treated very, very differently if they had stormed the Capitol instead of President Donald Trump supporters. No one can tell me that if it had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesting yesterday, they wouldn't have been treated very, very differently than the mob of thugs that stormed the Capitol, Biden said during a speech in Wilmington, Delaware. We know that it's true and it is unacceptable, totally unacceptable. The American people saw it in plain view, and I hope it unintelligible what we have to do. Biden, whose election victory was officially certified by Congress early Thursday morning, condemned the mob of Trump supporters who swarmed law enforcement and eventually broke into the Capitol building Wednesday, delaying the proceedings. At least 4 people died during the siege, 70 were arrested, and 14 cops were wounded, according to Fox News. Tweet from the Daily Caller, Biden saying no one can tell me that if it had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesting yesterday, they wouldn't have been treated much very, very differently than the mob of thugs that stormed the Capitol. What we witnessed yesterday was not disorder, or was not dissent. It was not disorder. It was not protest. It was chaos. Biden said of the Trump mob, they weren't protesters. Don't you dare call them protesters. They were a righteous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. BBC World News tweeted that they weren't protesters. They weren't, don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden condemns yesterday's riot at the Capitol and lays blame on Donald Trump. So, I mean, it's interesting that Biden had said that, especially considering what all we've seen from Black Lives Matter and Antifa over the past year, with the riots since the shooting of George Floyd, since they're the ones calling for the Confederate statues and monuments to be taken down. I mean, and as had been mentioned in a few articles, I think I had mentioned yesterday, plus in a couple of that I'm about to bring up, Black Lives Matter and Antifa did infiltrate themselves in the Trump rally. and yes, were some signs about that the Capitol breach was planned to discredit Trump supporters. This from the American thinker and Antonio Chavez. It may be weeks before we fully understand the fallout from the January 6, 2021 storming of the Capitol building. The prevailing consensus from conservative talk show hosts and editors is that this event provided ammunition to Trump's enemies and gave squishy Republicans an excuse to abandon their objections to the certification of Biden's electors. That may be true, but based on what I saw experienced firsthand, I am conflicted on what to say about those who entered the building. According to the website wildprotest.com, the original plan was to gather at the White House ellipse from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., then gather at the north lawn of the Capitol building at 1 p.m. As you may well know, not only did it not happen this way, but the aforementioned website went blank. Did they take it down to make it harder for Trump supporters to show that storming the building was never part of the initial plan? My group boarded a DC Metro train at 10:30 a.m. Upon arrival to the next station, I saw three white young men board the train with dark clothes and skeleton face masks. My immediate concern was that these were Antifa thugs who would give us trouble as soon as they saw us get off the train with our signs. As I watched them from the corner of my eye, I noticed that one of them wore a cape with the American Revolution snake joinered eye. Were these Trump supporters? Something did not seem right. As the train approached our destination, other rally participants started to fill our coach and we arrived at the ellipse with no incident. The participants at the ellipse were for the most part in good spirits and remarkably friendly, just as they had been in other Stop the Steal rallies I attended in D.C. on November 14 and December 12. Most attendees were white, and though most non-whites were Asian, two of the people who complimented me on my poster were African Americans. The main difference that struck me as unusual during this rally, apart from the three young men who boarded the train, was the frequent smell of marijuana. We were present during much of the president's speech, but since we could not hear it clearly, we walked to the National Mall in search of a bathroom. We found a public restroom on the mall with two lines of over 50 people. We then proceeded to walk down the mall toward the Capitol building in search of porta potties and found one with a line of about 20 to 30 people. I bet it was only 20 minutes, but it was overflowing, and I felt very bad for the women in our group. During the previous rally, there had been many portable toilets on the mall. This lack of facilities was anticipated because we were advised that when this served to wear diapers. I had the impression that the DC mayor wanted to make it less comfortable for us. As we resumed walking towards the Capitol building, we got caught up in the march. As we approached the building, I saw no evidence of people moving to the north lawn as previously planned. I also noticed that the people first arriving at the building were on average much younger than the group I had left at the ellipse. To my great surprise, young people started to climb the stairs of the Capitol stairs and the inauguration bleachers flanking each side of the stairs. Since I was far behind the crowd, it was not clear to me whether or not they pushed through police barricades in order to get there. But as I neared the building, I saw what appeared to be metal barricades that had been pushed aside as we neared the building. When we arrived on the Capitol steps, we saw a young man with a bullhorn on top of the highest scaffolding, urging participants to move forward. Soon we heard what sounded like ceremonial cannon fire and saw smoke, and I smelled tear gas. I was not aware that anyone had entered the building until someone with an iPhone told me gleefully that Congress had evacuated the chambers and that the vote was delayed. I was shocked and wondered if she had a point in celebrating what happened. Now, up to that point, I had not witnessed any of the violence involved in pushing through the barricades or entering the building. The only destruction property I witnessed firsthand was the alleged Antifa infiltrator breaking a window, only to be forcibly pulled away by Trump supporters. Suddenly, the three young men I saw earlier on the train with scary masks in front, but poor America's symbols on their backs, made sense to me, as did the widespread smell of marijuana. Around 4 a.m. or around 4 p.m., I started to leave. As I walked away from the crowd at the Capitol, an elderly man asked me my opinion on what had transpired. I told him that I heard the vote had been delayed, but remained undecided as to whether or not this was a good thing. He then proceeded to tell me that a young lady was shot dead while entering the Capitol building and lamented that God did not want it to happen this way. Based on what I saw and read, I have no doubt that dozens and possibly even hundreds of Antifa and or other provocateurs had infiltrated the rally in order to carry out violent acts and suck impressionable Trump supporters into their antics. None of this violence was justified, but contrast the frustration and conflicted attitude of this Capitol building trespasser with that of this proud BLM rioter. One calls for prayer while the other calls for reparations. Some of the more impulsive Trump supporters fell into a trap that served to scapegoat both the Trump administration and the 99% of rally participants who neither condoned nor participated in any of the violence. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the consensus of what I had been seeing from what I've been reading and hearing. But yeah, I mean, and of course there is the media aspect. This coming from our good this coming from our good friends over at the Federalist, which says outrage over DC is not about democracy, it's about wielding power, by Daniel Davidson. After the pro-Trump mob stormed the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday, Twitter blue checks, politicians, and elite corporate journalists wailed and rent their garments in outrage. But they weren't really outraged. Yes, the breach of the Capitol was appalling and disturbing. Most people didn't see it coming and were understandably shocked when images of MAGA bros fighting Capitol Police began popping up on social media. Although the authorities should have been better prepared, most of all DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, who had earlier rejected offers of additional law enforcement. There is no question the protesters who decided to riot should be prosecuted, as all riots everywhere should be. But the outrage is not really about what happened at the Capitol, about the sacred citadel of our democracy being defiled and so on. The outrage, like almost all expressions of the righteous indignation from our elites in the Trump era, is performative. It is in service of a larger purpose that has nothing to do with the peaceful transfer of power and everything to do with the wielding of power. Specifically, it's about punishing supporters of President Trump. If the pro-Trump mob can be depicted as terrorists and traitors, then there's almost nothing we shouldn't do to silence them, right? Rick Klein, the political director at ABC News, said the quiet part out loud on Thursday when he mused in a now deleted tweet that getting rid of Trump is the easy part and the more difficult task will be cleansing the movement he commands. Now, that's not the kind of language you use when you're in the business of reporting the news. It's the kind of language you use when you're in the business of social control. A lot of people have noted the supposed hypocrisy of media elites like Klein, yet it's not really hypocrisy because Klein and his comrades don't really have a problem with violent mobs storming in a building and smashing windows, so long as they agree with the mob's agenda. That's why corporate media was so tolerant of much larger and more dangerous mobs destroying American cities for months on end last year. When Black Lives Matter stormed halls and police stations, burned down churches and ransacked shopping districts in major U.S. cities, killing dozens and destroying livelihoods, the media offered support for the rioters' cause, which they invoked time and again to justify their criminal acts. That's why CNN's Chris Cuomo said, please show me where it says protesters are supposed to be polite and peaceful. That's why his colleague, Don Lemon, compared the riots to the Boston Tea Party, saying this is how our country started. That's why Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez argued, the whole point of protesting is to make people uncomfortable. That's why incoming Vice President Kamala Harris urged her supporters to contribute to a fund to pay bail for militant anarchists who set fire to Minneapolis. That's why reporters at MSNBC and CNN describe fiery riotous scenes as mostly peaceful protests, sometimes while buildings and cars burn in the background. And Alex Sal retweeted the quote from Cuomo, please show me where it says protesters are supposed to be polite and peaceful. I posted that back in June of last year. As my colleague Tristan Justice recently chronicled, this default posture of support for the riots was pervasive in the media. CQ or GQ, Slate, Mother Jones, Time Magazine, Vox, the New York Times, NPR. All of them ran news stories, analyses, and columns justifying the violence, praising the protesters, and mulling over the deeper meaning of it all. Condemnations were few and attenuated. They won't do that about the pro-Trump rioters at the Capitol. In his monologue Wednesday night, Tucker Carlson made the good point that we have to find a way through our political divisions in this moment of crisis. Above all, we have to learn to live together. There is no opinion to peacefully divide. There's no option to peacefully divide and go our separate ways. So we want to fix this. He said we need to try and understand why Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot and killed at the Capitol, was there in the first place. What was she doing there? Our elites in the media, in corporate America, in politics, have no interest in that question. They don't want to understand people like Babbitt because they don't actually want to share a republic with them. To paraphrase Rick Klein of ABC News, they want to cleanse the country of some of Trump supporters, period. It won't be easy. Trump supporters aren't going to disagree because Anderson Cooper thinks they're gross. Plenty of media people, along with plenty of Democrat leaders, spend Wednesday and Thursday arguing that Trump gave the protesters the idea to storm the Capitol, that he egged them on and incited them. But the media, which sows the wind all year long with news talk about riots, did far more to bring down the whirlwind on Wednesday than Trump did. When you argue for months and months that there is nothing wrong with rioting or mob action or fighting with the police, then we have to try to understand the rioters and their complaints. Don't be surprised if a certain segment of the population takes you at your word. Now, none of this is to excuse or defend the people who stormed the Capitol, like the mobs that stormed through American cities this spring and summer. They should have been stopped by force if necessary. Turns out Senator Tom Cotton was right all along. But it is to say that both groups were motivated by strongly held beliefs that, in their minds, justified rioting. In the case of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, it was the belief that America is in the throes of white supremacy and systemic racism, and that police kill disproportionate numbers of black people. In the case of the pro-Trump mob at the Capitol, it was the belief that the election was stolen, rigged, fraudulent, and that no one would listen to them or take them seriously. Now, I happen to think both these sets of claims, on the BLM side and the Trump side, are misguided and wrong, but not our media elites. They are squarely on the side of the BLM mob and against the pro-Trump mob, and they have zero interest in trying to understand why all these people showed up at the Capitol on a Wednesday in January. They do, however, have a keen interest in cracking down on the wrong kind of mob. Their outrage isn't just a performance or a pose. It's also a mask hiding something worse than hypocrisy: anticipation. And that is so totally true as well. I mean, you know the the real question with this is what's going to happen next. And I think I think we'll find out what Trump's plans will be after he leaves office on January 20th. But leave a leave a comment below. Where do you think Trump's plans will be? And I'll see you in the next video. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.